Yeah, like yes.
Welcome everybody. This is our latest edition of the Vidhi book Adda, in which we discuss the recently published book with the author of the book. We've had around six previous editions. All of them have been digital, and this is the first time we're having a physical edition of this event right here at our new Vidhi office. And it's also, as it happens, the first proper event we're having at the new office. And we have with us here Professor Maidul, who has and we'll be discussing his book Political Theory and South Asian Counter Narratives. I'll just give a slight introduction. Professor Islam is a political scientist at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Calcutta, and he's the author of two previous books. One was called The Limits of Islamism, the Jamaat-e-Islami in Contemporary India and Bangladesh. This was, as I understand, your doctoral thesis as well in Oxford. And he's also been the author of Indian Muslims After Liberalization, a book that we actually had Professor Islam discuss with us quite a few years back, 4 years back, 2019. All right, 3 years back, in our old office at Vidhi. And it's a pleasure to have him back here again for his third book, which I already mentioned. The subject matter of the book is something that actually quite fascinates me. As somebody, all of us here are, many of us here at least, are lawyers working in the field of policy. So the idea of working in policy, while it's not as structured in questions of legalism as it is in questions of policy per se, nonetheless we end up having a lot of pragmatic, or we have to think a little in terms of practical aspects of implementation. And it has been my view, though, that in trying to formulate good policy, especially for people who have been trained in the law, where we are only largely taught what the law is and how it is going to be interpreted in courts, it's often necessary that we have some kind of interdisciplinary approaches to understanding. And one particular field that has been a particular use, at least a particular significance for me, has been political theory. To give a small example, many lawyers tend to think of how laws should be like by appealing to the constitution or to constitutional values. But this doesn't really give us much of an answer about how, for example, the constitution should be like. There are theories in India about what is the essence or the basic structure of the constitution, but eventually appeals by lawyers to these values have to be appeals to political theory. When you look for the basic structure of the constitution, you are eventually speaking to a kind of political theory that the constitution might be embedding. But I don't need to narrow the scope of your book to the question of law. I just find that this is one of the things that has struck me when it comes to the subject matter, generally speaking. So I'd love to hear about how it is like to be approaching the question of the subject of political theory in your study. What kind of problem you've been looking at? What it's like to be working on a regional study of political theory, and why particularly South Asia, and what makes it particularly special. So if you have to give us a little bit of a lay of the land.
So thank you very much for this introduction and the clarity of your questions. So first of all, there was issue with the publishing. My initial suggestion was the name should be Progressive Visions as a title, and then the subtitle should be Political Theory and South Asian Counter-Narratives. There's a humorous side to this, and there's a serious side to this. Humorous side to this. So progressive visions, why progressive visions? I was saying my partner, and saying that you don't have a glass spectacle. I don't have a glass of spectacle. It's progressive visions. And the serious side of this, which is the question of progress and how human beings are interested in the idea of progress. And because I was dealing with the Euro-American academics political scholarship, the fundamental text of Marx, progressivist thinker, uh, later you have Freud is also uh, Mill, a little bit of Nietzsche. So these are my anchors, major anchors in the first part of the book. So the first chapter of the book called political theories, the part one is political theory and the part is salvation doctrine. So the first part you have 5 chapters, and where you have the first chapter you have a question of translation that you need for long. Not just as a student, when I was a student at Presidency College, later in training at Oxford also, but I've been just thinking about justice, not from the how lawyers think, so, but of course it's a part of the field of it. So this is something which I have extended over the years, and that was chapter 1. Chapter 2, which is kind of commentary on the cinema. So where all these Marx and Freud and all of them some
Quite a choice of movies, but yes, certainly at least.
so why I'm doing that, I think, and then the third chapter, you have a kind of Marx, Freud and Marx, and mostly the Tata, and dealing with Islamic discourses. Okay. And in the fourth chapter, we have a public representation of recently Marx. And fifth chapter, which is what makes the book.
The sixth one is the fifth one. It's already on the South Asian counter.
The fifth chapter is object professor.
Okay.
And fourth chapter is promise of alternative. Promise of alternative transforming capitalism.
All right. Yes.
So what you have is that the first 5 chapters is where core political theory and how you deal with certain issues in the discipline of political economy, psychoanalysis, field studies,
From the Euro-American.
from the Euro-American. That's the part 2, which is South Asian counter-narratives, is where the 6th chapter is the partition debates. So where how South Asia was looking and that the partition debates were happening. And then you come to the present situation, where the rise of religious majoritarianism and you have CAA NRC debates. So chapter 7, 8, and 9, these 3 chapters decide with those issues. And chapter 10 is basically a critique of the organized left. So whatever survived in the last 30 years when the saffron brigade were rising, the left were kind of declining. So this is, and whatever happened to the left and why. This is a brief structure of the book. Okay. And then there's another thing which why I have, since we have kind of clarified it's a limits of Islam and
Yes.
liberalization, and so there is also connect.
Yeah.
You can say it's a trilogy. So limits of Islamism deals with India and Bangladesh, which is also South Asian studies book. Political theory, of course, I have applied there. State philosophy also there. That's how our training was. Indian Muslim after liberalization, but I finished the book. Shruti Capital was.
Yes.
She was married. Precisely argued that in the epilogue of the book, I presented that there could be 3 visions of India. One is left-wing populism. Second is Ambedkar social democracy. The third is.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Federalist political outlook.
Okay. So again, Ambedkar,
Ambedkar social democracy,
federalist.
federalist political outlook, and the left-wing populism.
All right.
Now, this could have been a counter narrative to the main religious fundamentalist kind of politics that has been grappling South Asia. So my first book deals with Muslim fundamentalism, although in the scholarly jargons we don't use fundamentalism because fundamentalism is very much linked to Protestant Christianity, whereas in the East it says Hindutva or religious freedom. There's a lot of stuff. There are just those stuff. I'm not going into that because of cost of time. One could say Islamism. So basically, that's how. The Indian Muslim after liberalization also has South Asian component. India is a bigger country. It's the most largest country. It's some South Asian region. And this one, the political theory of South Asian component. So this is again a lake. From publisher point of view, the first book was published at Cambridge University Press. Cambridge. Then the second one is Oxford University, Oxford. And then this one is Routledge. It's not Abingdon, but one was in London. That's why it's London. Oxford, Cambridge, London, that's a Delta, that's a triangle.
Long South Asian triangle.
One would say. My forefathers were born and brought up in Sundarbans, the Indian Sundarban Delta region. In the middle of the COVID-19 Delta, I would say, I thought that that's a good idea to publish it. Okay.
Yeah. But then I just wanted you to give us, help us out a little bit with trying to get the scope of this question, or your choice of topic for this particular book. I see now that there was a thread running in the previous books. But for this particular book, the problem that you choose to pick up, especially this juxtaposition of the traditional narrative in political theory and strains that have emerged in India, you felt that there was something missing or there's something that had to be contributed to political theory that was supposed to come out of India.
Yes, one problem with India, with Indian political science, is that we were too much caught up with Western political theory tradition. Now, that has been the pedagogy for 70 years. And now the current project that I am now involved in, was looking at how political science has been taught in universities. And the project that I am currently involved is funded by the Imperial Foundation for Decolonization University. And while going back to the first 30 years, it's 47 to 77, that's the first 30 years, it's hugely Euro-American books, textbooks, reference books. In fact, those who were publishing, they were very much into the methodological point of view of very much Euro-American. So either you have behavioral political scientists, particularly from North American statistics-oriented, empirical political science. Either you have that influence on them. So BM60 from Pune University, the Center for Study of Economic Society, Rajni Kothari, all of them were so much into structural functionalism, the kind of empiricism that you have. And of course, that tradition is a great tradition. I don't disagree with that because certainly today's election studies, electoral behavior has this.
But something doesn't fit.
Something doesn't fit. And what doesn't fit? The vernacular tradition is missing. Now, vernacular tradition is missing, and it has also been very much a problem to teach a different generation of students. Okay. So one particular suggestion to the left that I have suggested in the chapter 10 is that the pedagogy is such European that you are not communicating to your own cadres or to your own sympathizers in the language that you should have communicated. Now there has been translations, but there are a lot of problems in the translation. Whereas the RSS, in contrast, has actually been very much embedded in this wonderful tradition called law. Okay. So this is something which is, and that's why when as a public intellectual, I prefer to write more in Bangla, which is my mother tongue, and I speak to my audience in Bengal. Okay. Of course, I can write in Hindi, I can read Hindi because it was my in school being the third language, and I still read Hindi newspapers. Today I was just reading Hindi newspaper, CSS library, great library. But so that problem is there.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Islam. The question of language, it sounds as if you're suggesting that if there was a language gap or some kind of a barrier in communicating certain kinds of values, ideas, or theories to an Indian audience, to Indian citizens, to South Asian people generally, then that sounds more as if the medium was the problem and not the content itself. Is it that we need Western theory to be translated better and communicate better, or is there something in the vernacular tradition itself, already in the languages of India, which would suggest that they are better fitting to particular theories for India?
So one lesson that one has to learn from Marx, and this is something which I have very trying to do, is that you need to understand your political opponent well. That's why Marx wrote Capital, because of course he was when you want to understand how capital works. Now he is of course in favor of labor, but we want to understand how capital works. Now this is something where we need to also be open-minded. We should not completely say that all Western political theories that we don't learn. So of course, that's not the approach. And similarly, you can't say that okay, you don't learn from RSS, you don't learn from BJP, you don't learn from because they are all political. So that's not how scientific output works. I was looking at there is old debates. I couldn't find a book of C.P. Hamri in the CSK's library. C.P. Hamri was Marxist, and there's a huge debate between C.P. Hamri and Randy Kothari. Now, this is how it shouldn't work. At least as teachers, this is how it should work. You have to be open-minded. So and as a teacher, I find it very difficult to say that you should not read that, you should not read that. So problem is that suppose in the class I have students from very different kinds of backgrounds, first generation students, students coming from different class backgrounds, students coming from different class backgrounds, students coming from different religious backgrounds, students coming from different political families. Right. So how do I then say that you can't read that, you don't have to read that? When we were students, don't go to North Campus because that's a very different zone. Don't go to Delhi University. Don't go to CSK. For the first time in my life, I come to see the first time for the first time in my life because this we were discouraged. So this is something you need to be open-minded and be scientific. Try to be scientific. And this is what I try to do in my entire so far in fact I try to be scientific. But there's a problem with the RSS as far as CAA and NRC debates are concerned.
And restricted to just that problem, or
no,
is it a symptom?
I'm saying that this is not just symptom of the closed minds.
Yes, the most tangible out
That's
first of some kind of
that's the issue, and that has been very much exposed in the CAA and NRC debates. Because I just simple thing. If you want the Akhand Bharat, which is in the South Asian region, Vishal Bharat, okay, then you go for that. Okay, but if you think that okay, I need to just point out some religious community and discriminate, and Vidhi has been, and some of your fellows have also been there. I referred in my book, I referred on. Then it's a difficult. Because as far as the bill is concerned, my position is that see this is a discriminatory bill. Now in the how the lawyers politically it's a discriminatory bill. Now how the lawyers will justify how it has been passed in the parliament, what the lawyers will not have. We understand, we know that. Point is that you cannot discriminate the Muslims, the Tamil Hindus, because Sri Lanka has not included. We do Muslims in China, okay? No religion category. Okay, there's no atheist agnostic, no religion category, because some people might actually become an atheist or an agnostic over the years. No Judaism is again, so no Jews. Now all these religious categories, no religion, Judaism, Muslims, they are all registered in the Indian census, as far as I know. So if you say that this is you recognize in your Indian census, and you say that these people should not be, part of the bill. So what is the government of India? What is it doing? So then you have proper political motive. From the Indian civilization point of view, if India is the ultimate of a dish, then you can't just say that no to these people if they have been persecuted because they are religious minorities in those countries.
So you mentioned this idea of the idea that is often you try to juxtapose these two different ways of looking at a majoritarian project or a project of the Indian identity. One you suggested was something about how South Asia can be considered as one region or one nation in a way, and the other was what you suggested was some more tangible, almost real differentiations between individuals that are exclusions that can be created in people's benefits, the distribution of benefits and resources to individuals, such as the CAA and NRC, the most visible, tangible instance where explicitly religious differentiation was made. And this somewhat brings to mind to me that the last few years, during which time the BJP government has been in power, there has been this sort of vacillation in the minds of some liberals, in the minds of some people observing politics, that if there is any exclusion, it is happening more in the form of political rhetoric than in the form of actual substantial benefits. And all of these things about the failure to speak out about lynching, the failure to do certain kinds of things, absence, omissions in a sense, have been more of a concern. And various rhetorical speeches, expressions that are carried out, have been more of a concern than actual tangible material things that the government has actively done, which has been CARC has been the most explicit instance. So would you say that there is a problem here in how the identity is being defined, and that individuals who are too obsessed or focused on or for example, lawyers getting too obsessed with the actual legal differences being carried out, or whether the constitution has in fact been violated, that somewhat misses the forest for the trees.
Yeah, but the point is that so at the rhetoric here, it is chapter 8,
Yes.
is the rhetoric. Point is that whether the Indian government is serious to deal with the actual questions. Now, as far as the Constitution is concerned, the fundamental rights and the basic rights. Now, my argument has been so far in the second group and several arguments that fundamental rights are justiciable to court. So only a weak state can only argue about like tolerance and our citizens are not conscious about their rights. So this is so after all these critiques and all, so finally I can give an example. So finally there is a resolution by the IITs and the NITs that Constitution of India should be a compulsory paper. Okay, and probably offered by the National Studies and Technology Department to teach Constitution of India for the first time in on a career. So that's a visiting. The point is that there is so much disconnect between scientists, technologists, and the social scientists that nobody cares what our constitution is all about. what are the fundamental rights?
Yeah. Because this is something actually we have also been quite concerned about, which is
So,
how does
so
one.
now the midnight debate is that we should be more interested in fundamental duties. Right?
And then
Now, some people understand that fundamental duties are very important and those things are key. Western and of course, that's not the issue. But a counter question would be that suppose you smoke. And I was kind of roaming around daily, and these are my part of field work. And there's a passive smoking, and it actually quite contaminates not only the air but also the person that you are next to. So what is the duty? What is the duty of a good citizen? Okay. You don't follow traffic lights. You don't follow how to cross the road. What's a good citizen? As a teacher, we are being taught by our rules. We should be like a good citizen. Right? Now, so your constitution, the fundamental duties, they're also very restricted.
Yeah, that's a.
But the state will always say that you do these things and you will be a bacha. You will be a good person. But the state will not perform the exact things that they should do, which is your fundamental rights. So mob lynching happening, anything is happening, and the state is just shut. It's mouth shut. So ordinary people are just getting killed.
So this brings to mind the factor that you brought in about what is the kind of identity, the kind of constitutional identity that the state wants to enforce or the state wants to push onto citizens. And this idea perhaps about what makes a good citizen, and the specific example you gave about smoking and causing some harm to somebody else. This obviously has brings out a lot of flavor about traditional liberalism. And it brings to mind the idea that our constitution can in many ways be considered a liberal document. It is in many ways. It contains a lot of liberal ethos. The word now seems to be not used anymore, but the principles are there.
Sure.
So I just want you to give us some standard because we could be moving in too much terrain. I want you to give me some standard against which we can assess what good political theory can be like in South Asia. Do you think we have developed a good political theory for South Asia, which is an alternative to liberalism? Or is it liberalism? Is it a kind of liberalism? Or is it ill-fitting for India that liberalism should not be used at all?
The point is that there is a context in which certain words get completely banned. You don't use liberalism or you don't use liberalism. Because why you don't use liberalism, why you don't use liberalism, these are not political questions. These are personal questions. So that's the problem with Vidhi. But India, as this Indian political scientists, politicians, and they say that okay, because these people are actually they consume so much alcohol, or they are basically devout, or you just stereotype it. You just stereotype it, okay? Or they live in those mansions and they live in those houses, and that's why they are liberals and just liberalism and right? But the political theory tradition, we don't use a word just like and liberalism has done a lot of good to India. And the constitution is of course there's a lot of liberalism in the constitution. There's a lot of other things.
Also, you mentioned drinking. I mean, immediately one thinks of the.
Yes, but I'm just saying that if you look at constitution, then there's a lot of social democracy part also there, right? So yeah, you could say that it's a
mix.
It's a mix. Of course, it's a mixed constitution. India is full of India is mixed economy. You have
India is the third way. Some of the parts that.
India is always but India has been a very it's not one country in that sense. I want to say that it's a civilization, but at the same time, from a constitutional point of view, it's a nation state. So it's a mixed economy. It's a mixed constitution, and it's it's a mixed country. So it's not, you can't say it's very authentic, Puritan, purist,
Yeah.
kind of.
I'll just ask you one last question, Professor Islam, and then I'll open the floor for the discussion. I think we've led through without too much engagement from the audience. But I thought to bring a very specific example, which we are considering. Just yesterday, there was a judgment from the Karnataka High Court on the hijab, and because in the fact that there are institutions which can ban hijab in a space like the classroom. And I want to ask you about this particular, very specific situation in the context of political theory, in the context of majoritarianism specifically, and particularly keeping in mind the idea that this is an imposition that is being forced upon people supposedly to make them free, while pretending that it is about uniformity and discipline. The hijab supposedly is an illiberal practice, so we will illiberally prevent this illiberalism by forcing freedom on a person. And this has been justified somehow by the Karnataka High Court. But how do you think this squares, this kind of approach squares with whatever liberal ethos is there in the constitution, and instances like cow slaughter or bans, prohibition on alcohol, all of these instances, which have in the past been instances of paternalism. Uh, is this something that India has somehow acclimatized itself to because it wasn't
I
vigilant?
don't want to comment on the hijab controversy because I am not that followed in detail. As far as cow slaughter is concerned, of course, I have written those things in my previous articles and also in the book. Secondly, of course, the basic principles of state policy you have that, but then there is also a kind of disturbance between some states, there is no ban and some states there is ban. Now, I'm not going into that. I have stopped writing and commenting on anything on Muslim and Islam because there is a lot of people who write and comment on that. But I think that there is when you have libertarianism, what's happening? If you look at France also, there's a licensed kind of secularism, which is like standard hijab or minarets and all.
Very strict separation.
Our secularism is not directly influenced by French secularism. Our secularism, because of the English origin, our secularism is more, genealogy is more linked to British and to some extent American way of secularism. America's own training in both UK and US.
So you don't see this is secularism is an instance where there was a homegrown political theory about how to relate state and religion, and it might have been a successful political theory, but it wasn't implemented the right way. And I'm sort of actually questioning the linkage with UK and US because we did some things different here.
For sure, but the point is that because of the different tools and pressures of politicians, India has always been a populist democracy. So it wanted to be liberal democracy. It wanted to mimic the Euro-American democracy, but it couldn't. Now, because you want to mimic, there is always a kind of deficit. Because you can't be like the authentic, Puritan. So you neither became like UK nor became like the US, but
Show something but
yes, but the point is that you need to be like yourself. So you if you're Indian, you want to be, you should be like
authenticity
authentic.
as a political party.
No, but there is no pure authenticity. That's the problem because that's where all problem starts. Everything is hybrid. If you break in terms of physics and all, if you go back, so it's all that there is no pure authenticity. So you go back to elements, nucleus, atoms, all sort of things. So where to find that authenticity? So this is a problem in social sciences and
You can't compare it with physical science. There can be some essentialism for an element, but there can't be essentialism for a person.
this is the problem with the discipline of political science itself.
It aims for that.
It aims for science, and you need to also learn from the scientists. But at the same time, you can't become like pure science. And this is and political theory, because the part of the discipline of political science is somewhere caught up between the British European tradition of politics, government, because of the huge emphasis on normative political thought, and political thought in terms of thinking, and then American political science. Now, India is of course, the most of the departments political science, because you want it to be like the US, which was at that time, during the period of decolonization, American empire was one.
Yeah.
Now, in my book, it says that the American empire is now declining.
Yeah, there is some questioning at least. There's
And this, so China, India, Russia, the old empires, and they are rising. So, I mean, if you think about the global balance of our relations, why would we, let's say, be in another 20 years, 30 years? Would we be like Portugal in the colonial game? Remember, in the colonial game in the 19th century, and even in the 18th century, there are several powers, multiple powers. But the final game was between England and France, and England became the winner. Okay.
Yeah.
So here now, so all these old empires, they are coming back. So in other words, and that's why I do this political science or political theory metaphors. So whether it's a return of the Hobbesian state,
Yeah.
because the Lockean state is winning, which is liberal democracy, contract, those things are winning. America, which has been largely following that Lockean state, is kind of slowly declining. And old empires, which is emperors, old empires with the emperor, Chinese emperor, you have the Mughal empire here in Asia. And then you had this Russian empire. All these are emerging.
History is coming back.
Now, exactly. Now, how do I express that? I have to only express that in the tragedies. I have to only express that in the Euro-American political theory, jargon or terminology, whatever you say. I have to only say that Hobbesian Leviathan or Lockean state, because there is a lack of vernacular tradition in English. Because I'm writing in English, so my audience is in English.
Here we are, yes. So yes, I'll open the floor to any questions. Professor Islam has already covered a very vast range of issues. But if there's something that struck your, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. So, actually, what you were talking about mimicry reminded me of the Sufi Baba essay of mimicry and balance. It's a famous essay. But you know how when we try to mimic, we become a parody of the thing itself. And especially when it comes to these rights of these old empires, I was wondering, what do you think? Do you think a lot of people, including people in my family, actually, are of the opinion that this rise of majoritarianism in India is this back to this authentic self? Do you think that's something that is actually moving towards this goal of going back to something that is maybe pre-colonial, or is it moving away from any authenticity that we might have towards each other at all? Because given that so much of this is influenced by colonialism in itself.
So yeah, that's a good question. So I find that there are several time zones parallelly working in India. So a person who still believes in astrology, that it is at least 2000 years old, and I find I regularly read the astrology, columns, and it's very funny and sometimes very of course, enjoy. So it is at least 2000 years old, if not palmistry is of course much much younger than the kind of sun sign astrology. I mean, previously astronomy and astrology both were closed because of, so there's one time zone, and then you have all sorts of superstitions, and in the informal setting, just go there and you'll find that some Baba, some Vidhi, some Vidhi. Now, if you go back to this authenticity, you say that, okay, 2000 years back we had this tradition, and you go back there, and that's a way of looking at India. And you have now courses like astrology and yogic sciences and all sorts of different kinds of courses that is now coming up to the universities, and there have specific colleges and universities which are focused on these particular traditions, and in fact they want to justify it as science. Now, for science will be humble. Science will always say that, look, we don't know enough, we don't know much, because we are not the final word. That's why the question is all about.
And we need to revise those.
We need to revise and always, so you need to move forward, which is the question of progress that I have tried to discuss this in my book, this, the introduction to progress contra evolution. Now, I'm a very anthropocentric person in that sense. So the evolution of the animal world is another great evolution. Now, so this is something, the authenticity. There is nothing called a pure authenticity. This is one problem. Of course, you are right about Bhavan's whole the location of culture with the concept of mimicry is very much discussed. So yes, but of course, Bhava is taking it from Locke. So the mimicry and all that is coming up. But another problem with us is that when we read either Marx or Freud or Tata or whoever, European thinkers, we read in translation, and a lot of things that have been lost in translation, and so the authenticity is gone right from the beginning. So, and several editions, different editions have different translations, and so the lost in translation is okay. Is a problem for any teacher. So the authenticity question that you are asking is
How far back will it be authentic?
yes.
Then,
And now you have, and because of, and I find it among students that because you have now a digital version of everything,
Yeah.
you immediately try to say that okay, is he or she authentic? Is he or she, because there is lack of trust in society. And because you have lack of trust in society, because people have been so much duped and cheated by bankers, by politicians, by a lot of people, that people does not trust. And people is always Google whether he or she exists, whether he or she has this, whether his or her house is exactly in that location. You know, everything.
So my question, if I can just press further,
Yes.
is, I mean, reaching this point of authenticity is, of course, as you very cleverly elaborated, is futile. But is the quest to search for it, to Google and to look for it constantly and double fact check it, triple fact check, is that also futile? Or do you think there's some merit to trying to find an authentic self at all?
No, I don't find it futile. What I find is that because of lack, one is the lack of what we call the information asymmetry. Now, information asymmetry is a very different meaning in the discipline of economics, but I'll just say what is information asymmetry is all about. So let's say you have one information, but you don't know the full facts, right? And then they confuse you. Okay, that's one aspect. The second is that people just don't know how to deal with technology. So let's say what I'm doing now today. So I first came to JD as a student in the year 2003, and I have been going. I'm now going. And of course, I've been periodically coming. So 2003, 7, 11, then 14, 15. How much baby has stayed, and I'm going to the same places, right? So let's say I went to Paradewali Gardi, and that exact shop is still is there, Lassi wala all this. But Khante wala ka mithai ka dukaan, it's not there, but in Google Map it's there. The Jalebi wala say that yeah, Khante wala ka mithai nahi. So I said that when it still exists in the one. As a neighbor, why don't you just report it that it doesn't exist? Why don't you become a local guy? It's just not interesting. But those who are customers of Khantewala, should have just reported to Google. That they can just do it. So that, because the foreigners, when they come to India, and they say it just doesn't exist, India is a fake country. Because we are overdetermined by technology. That's the problem. And so we are a bad place and a bad name. Because there's so much which are overdetermined by technology. Now it's a completely technocratic society now. So India always had this bureaucratic society, so you have bureaucracy. At the same time, you have take a Presidency University. So you have a very difficult thing to coordinate between these two. Because bureaucracy is still caught up in this old logic, lack of efficiency, poor technology, poor work, no time, delivery on time. Those are problems. But how do you live in a technocratic society? So, that's if I can answer your question, if you have some time more, then also
Yes,
discuss it.
sure, you can follow up after this. Yeah.
So just coming back to that point of translation and what gets lost in translation, and because we were discussing this hijab judgment, and there was something very interesting, and my question is not about the hijab judgment, is that the Karnataka government order which banned the hijab was in Kannada. And in Kannada, the word they used for, or the words they used for justifying it, I'm not saying it because I'm a Kannada speaker, but because it's reproduced in English in the document, is Sarvajanika Suvyavasthe, okay, which is obviously Sanskrit, but maybe in Kannada also, which broadly, as a Bengali slash little bit Sanskrit speaker, it would be collective good, Sarvajanik Suvyavasthe, or good, something about good governance, or collective good governance, or collective well-being, or something of that kind.
Vyavastha is like a facility.
Vyavastha is like a system. Huh. So like for the collective good system, or something like that. That's how I would perhaps translate it. Now the problem that emerges is that this word has no translation in English, no easy translation in English. So what the judges are doing is that they are saying, oh, this means public order. Okay. Now obviously Sarvajanik Suvyavasthe does not mean public order. Okay, it certainly does not mean order of any kind. Suvyavastha does not mean order. Now, but the issue that arises is that the reason why they are saying public order is because public order is one of the justifications for restricting the freedom of religion in the constitution. Okay.
Also, it so happens that some translations in Kannada have used this. Constitution translations in Kannada have used this particular phrase as well.
For public order.
Some people think it's the translation.
No, but it may be. But the fact is that this I am a little more confident because it's not a Kannada word.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean it's certainly I would otherwise I wouldn't have ventured to even say.
Like, what is not a Kannada word?
Like Sarvajanik is not a Kannada word, and Suvyavastha is also not a Kannada word.
There are no Kannadas.
I mean, these are Sanskritic origin words. As in, this is not a. This is certain. But anyway, the problem is I'm not so much on whether this is Kannada versus something else, but I'm also on English versus other vernacular. That's what my point is. Is that so? Here there is something that is lost in translation, and it is lost in translation because of the fact that there is a set model of what restrictions are permissible as far as the constitution is concerned. And so that this is of course more in the nature of a comment where we think that a lot is being lost in terms of what is being tried to be conveyed and what is actually being interpreted as, because we have to do it in English. And the related question that arises from that is that the constitution itself, and this is on that liberalism part that we were discussing. As I think the liberal conservative binary in order to see the constitution perhaps is a little bit mistaken, because as you said, I think it's kind of mixed up. It's got a lot of things going on. But one thing that is a thread that runs throughout at least the fundamental rights chapter is the overpowering role of the state, right? So the fact is that you have freedom of expression, but there are so many restrictions. Freedom of religion, so many restrictions. Even freedom of religion is restricted by other community rights. So the question that I have is that is the fact of this state-led model, the state could make us liberal. That's statism which could make us liberal, which was broadly Ambedkar's thinking because of his own where he came from. As in, is this something that is either a reaction to what we've seen in the West, or is it something that, to borrow the term that Maitreyi was using, is heading towards some degree of authenticity or a homegrown idea of what kind of nation state we are trying to create?
I think very, very good comments and very, very insightful as always. I think what's happening in India is that it is increasingly becoming statist. So, and this because of the long logic of this empire and the head of the state, which has bigger say in how things should work. And because of the old civilizational, cultural traces that it is now coming up. This is one way of looking at it. From a political economic point of view, one could say that there was this whole debate where whether India, what an Indian state is all about. So there is one kind of argument by Prof. who said that it was a relative autonomy of the state, how he did Marxist related to the curriculum. That, uh, so, so the neo-liberal state was largely a relative autonomy of the state. Okay? Because the true ruling class is yet to emerge. The state has to make happy. Now, today, I think what's happening after 30 years of liberalization, what's happening today is the state is again trying to make everyone happy. And this is a truly populist state which is not happening. And this is what I call the logic of governance in the chapter of how political works. So every party who wants to stay in power in the state, as well as in the center, which is in the Indian state, they want to give some votes, some kind of schemes, have to make the judiciary happy. There, of course, there will be exchanges. There will be also some kind of transaction. Then they have to make happy the administration. So this is how it works. So I think the translation part, of course, there's a lot of translation problem because of our own pedagogic training. That the courts have been always, not always, but I was saying that largely English oriented. There's also infinity superiority of text. So the judges want to what should I say, flaunt that how good are they in writing English.
Although I think that is changing.
That has been
I think
changed
that
for
is
a long
changing.
time, yes. No month of it, but that has been there. But then in the local courts, grandfathers, so there are a lot of Bengali or local language deeds or something what happens, have been happening for a long time. So I think that's the problem of translation. Now with the Google thing, you can translate. But the biggest problem is that technocratic thing is that whenever something is being translated, and some of my works have been translated in some conference one year. It is such a shorty job because I completely understand it's a Google translation. And that's a difficult thing. So you just say that whether you can give it in Hindi or Bengali. I can you just say that okay, you don't have to translate. I will give you authentic Bengali or not authentic, and because Bengali has a lot of what we call this optional shobdo, which is more Sanskritic and Kongo and Jyoti. So there's a lot of mixed language there. So or in Hindi also, I think there's a lot of that mixed language. So the point is that what you prioritize. If you think that okay, I won't use any other word, any foreign word. I would like to be more Sanskritic. Now I think that's a proper fundamental. That's a proper fundamental. We should resist that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Extending this idea of public order and moving to a related concept of uniformity. You think that the idea of uniformity, homogeneity, the state sort of suppressing deviation and in some cases sanctioning it is uniquely South Asian, or does it have some theoretical underpinnings in Western political thoughts?
I find that this is a new age of a technocratic state, and because it's a technocratic state now, it's there has to be some kind of uniformity. The logic of technology is like that. Otherwise, they can't recognize because it's all artificial intelligence and robotics and all. So even if you get a typo, one people can't recognize that. Rather. So this is So it might have, historians would say that it might have the logic of that, but now today there is a lot of change that has happened from the colonial state to the state that we are in. I have now stopped. I don't now use neoliberalism because that's a difficult thing. Whatever I used to do, I know that. Rather than saying those now updated. So every day you update. So the point is that because we have been taught like that. Whenever I gone, then I said that okay, fine, because of pedagogy and all. So okay, what was the neoliberal state? So of course, it's a response to the devious regime. It's a response to the Nehruvian state or the welfare state. Okay, but what is new about this? So either you say it's capitalism, fine. I understand that capitalism is all about capital, labor, state. You know, that's ensemble. But what is the new liberalism? The state was already always there. International trade was always there. And what is happening today, I think, in this context, is that it's a fast changing technology. Every time you need to update your apps and everything that you need to update. So fast, so it's a technocratic society. And so technology always needs some kind of homogenization, and state also needs that. But technology, because the state is so dependent on technology, that it's making us uniform or homogeneous. You see, but you can't be homogeneous because there is a lot of other differences. Now, how technology will deal with that, I don't know.
It's interesting. You seem to suggest that there is some linkage between how political theory develops, how politics develops, and how the most material aspect of technology develops. I may not entirely agree with whether technology necessarily homogenizes, because it has to standardize to be able to do certain things. But then, particularly data, it seems to be more about identifying things as unique.
Yes.
I'm using some very
No,
fitting words here, but yeah.
No, that's where the other comes to it.
Yeah,
That-
but it's being applied in a homogeneous manner. There are no exceptions to be made. That might be more the issue than the fact of technology itself.
Yes.
So it's the rules that are playing a bigger issue there than the technology itself.
I don't know about the rules there because the law has a lawyer's zone, but as a theorist, I can only say that the unique thing is all about that. That Aadhaar is now the unique identification identity. But point is that if you have so many identity cards, then it's difficult for the bureaucracy. And that's what I was talking about, the bureaucratic structure that we have to identify a person.
Yeah.
So that's another problem. And this is what has happened. You see, look at the NRC and the CAA. This is the prime problem. So what is the exact identity card that you want to
Say, for example,
check for?
have you suffered from religious persecution? Can you verify that? Is it possible?
So this is the problem.
That's
These are the issues.
Yeah.
These are the issues.
I like to think that it's the way that you become an information age actually runs through a lot of other things than just information technology. We political theory also needs to take information seriously. But I want to
Only just taking of the seriously. My books have all a lot of information is there. And the footnotes for the
was there anything else that
I was just wondering, are there any homegrown vernacular texts that one can read on political theory and science? I know you said there isn't a strong tradition, but are there one or two authors that you could name who have
no, I guess the classic texts who what? So you have Tagore, Gandhi, and just need to think that in terms of now this approach of reading Gandhi, reading Ambedkar, or reading Tagore, or some other thinkers, let's say, M.N. Roy, or even political thought tradition, even Chanakya, Kotuyo, and let's say how it was medieval political thought. Those are most of the writings or texts, these are in English. So that's the problem because the academy is so much elitist that when you come into a new generation of students, or first generation learners, coming from Bengali medium schools, Hindi medium schools, and they are now coming to university. It is difficult, and this should have been the priority of the Hindi Academy or the Bengal Academy or whatever South Academy. In CST, there are a lot of original writings in Hindi, so Jayaprakash Narayan and Bodhi. In fact, just before the day before the result of mine, I was working in the library where Jayaprakash Narayan's Hindi writing, Lohia writing. And I was thinking that what will happen tomorrow? The Lohia tradition, the Gandhian tradition, and you have Samajwadi Party. Not get a majority, but okay. So what happened? What happened to this? This tradition. And but the point is that the academy is so much elitist at English media pedagogy. It's difficult to get original text and to say that okay, read that because the quality of literacy is also so bad. When I get the students and they just don't know how to write in proper Bangla. It's a mixed thing, Bengali, English, all mixed when they give essay. Because you talk in a democratic society, you talk in SMS language. And so in WhatsApp groups or whatever, you talk in those languages. So when you write your term papers or when you write your assignments, you just write in a mixed language. So this is a problem at the level of language, how you think about it. I don't know what we did language, what is, how language is the new language gave. I was giving a satire. It's a different rule that people are following.
Yeah, so actually Vidhi's been asked to help solve this problem a little bit by working on something called same language subtitling, which means that all entertainment content, actually all content on television or digital content platforms should be subtitled in the same language in which it is spoken or
Yes.
and apparently that's a standard under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting's accessibility standards. But one of the objectives of it, apart from helping with persons with disabilities or those who are hard of hearing, is to improve reading literacy, as you were talking about.
Reading literacy.
Yeah.
Reading, people just don't know how to read a paper. Sometimes you perform, sometimes I perform. Like I deliberately say that please excuse my Bengali accent. But that's a political statement that you make. But yeah, people just don't know. But I'm just repeating some of my signals. So I'm just saying but the point is that when you say what, those things. But yeah, people just don't know how to read paper. How there's so a lack of skills, and that has been happening. That's why I have now decided that why not only teaching courses but also while training the researchers, while doing MPhil or PhD, you need to give basic skills training. Because they just don't have the instruments, they just don't know the software, the hardware, the apps and all. I just said, please come with your laptop, I will help you. Because there is a different state of students in a decolonial world. It's a new generation of vernacular background students are coming to your, and now these people will, in another 5 years, 10 years, they will populate your workspaces and offices. You have to deal with our generation. So the teachers of our generation have an added responsibility to give us proper skills training. You see? So one lack of textbooks in the Hindi medium or Bangla medium or the vernaculars, and the skills that you need. that's a very difficult, that's a challenging task.
The classic book on Indian political thought in the vernacular tradition is the Bhagavad Gita. So that's what everyone has always gone back to.
But people don't know how Gandhi made Bhagavad Gita. I am actually reading now how Gandhi made. It's interesting, very very interesting.
This actually
Also, my best uh, uh, text is Mahabharata, the classic text of politics, and my best character is Balaram, who is a referee, who is a teacher at the same time, and also does not take part in either side because he knows well that so he's so he's a referee, right? He's an umpire, and now it becomes famous. And so it's a cow. Personally, I'm also the Bada Bhai of my family, both fathers and mothers. That's a joke, but that's a joke, but at the same time, it's also a fact.
Okay, so Professor Sam, I mean, if you would allow me, I want to just ask one final question. If that's it's ready to close it, I think it would kind of tie up maybe, because the last word would be you, but kind of tie up what we've discussed so far about something about authenticity, about homegrown theories of India, majoritarianism, political theory generally in the subcontinent, and I mean, that's just a reference right now about an indigenous text like the Bhagavad Gita. And at the same time, also this question of return history. There was this sense, at least in the so-called liberal world, that after the World War and after a certain kind of liberal order was put into place, that there could be some end of this repetition of history. That we need not go back to violence, that we can at least have something that even if we come from different points of views, that we can agree that this much at least should not change. Right? And there's this sense that this was the position that the Western world arrived at after a long tradition of rigorous systematic study, very detailed systematic study of politics and political theory, answering questions that at least I personally believe many Indian philosophies don't even raise, they don't even ask questions about the relation between ends and means, the appropriate relation between individual and state, how to draw boundaries between concepts, epistemology as a subject, moral philosophy as a systematic area of study. But yet, all of this emerged in the West after having had a long tradition of religious thought, with thinkers like Thomas Aquinas thinking from the tradition of religion, people departing from religion, coming out of it and bringing out new thoughts. So, would you think that a system of political theory in India that tries to hark back to religious texts, and those ideas of philosophy would somewhere go fundamentally wrong, not just because it appeals to one religion to the exclusion of others, but because all religious thought may need to be developed to some extent before it becomes actually applicable to a real modern world where we have learned many lessons.
Yeah. Okay. So, so why do people follow religion? So either you have fear, some kind of fear, or there is a long superstitious tradition that you follow because you are born and brought up in such a milieu that you follow that. At the same time, class and language, these are very fundamental categories. So without language, you can't articulate. So communicate, so really clear and all how to, that's a difficult thing, right? So I find language is a big fundamental category. So that's a very basic category. Without language, you can't in fact think and think in something fixed, right? Now, in the Indian philosophy tradition, there is also a counter tradition, which is the Charvak Mutayaka, that secular tradition, very secular tradition. And in Buddhism, Jainism, which are all, one could say religions of consciousness, very realist. And Indian school of all these people. point is that when you have in the once you reach modern age, not modern time to say, but reach these colonial times and then even today in the technocratic society, even today, this religion becomes an anchor point of mobilization. So your Sri Lanka becomes again a religious majoritarian state. Bangladesh again becomes a very closet, if not a very overt, but a very closet kind of majoritarian state. Although you have a secular government, but then people are more complacent to some kind of religious fundamentalism that happened in the last Durga Puja celebrations there. So, and India is becoming, we know, in the last 7, 8 years, this tradition has become pretty there in this last 30 years.
A resurgence of religion.
Resurgence of the religious
Identity, though, more than the actual substance of politics.
identity, of course. I'm just saying that it's an easy way to mobilize you. So this is so in a populist democracy. If your fundamental anchor identity is religion, then it's easier for it. It has been happening, and politicians will of course choose this one over other because it's easier. Now the point is that if you have then if you have a secularist counter narrative to this structure growth of religions, then you will have to, fundamentally mobilize people around class and life.
There has to be some other identity that has to be comprehensive. There is no possibility.
Could be, but I just think these are fundamentally and from a class point of view, you have all these income-based growths and whatever. Even the BJP is kind of absorbing it. Language, they have completely focused on Hindi. And that's why the southeastern coastal zones, they have weak because of the regional language are very strong there. But Hindi is of course a bigger, linguistic. And in fact, in Uttar Pradesh, Ambedkar once said that the thought on linguistic states, his last political tract in 1955. Before he said, and he said that UP should be bifurcated into several states, and India should have a second capital in Hyderabad. So the balance between south and north, take up and so this is something. Now the point is that who are going to articulate these things. I won't find politicians in the secular camp to say that look, these are Ambedkar's demands, these are our constitutional demands. The RSS has accommodated everyone. It has accommodated Ambedkar, even Bhagat Singh. I am saying in the context of today's Punjab CA's swearing game, where Bhagat Singh was being celebrated, he made the advertisements and fine. So it's interesting that while the secular can, how the secular can, they need to re-strategize. You see, because the counter narrative of Euro-American thing, the counter narrative has been this rise of Bolivia, rise of RSS, BJP, this is the counter. Now you need to find a counter to the counter narrative. And that's how the secular, if the secularists are serious about their own future, they need to be re-strategize and think in terms of fundamental categories and then how to look at that. Then those things, other things are all technical things. Other things will be derivatives. All you need to reach the people in the sense that
you mentioned a lot of the practical gaps that are there in reaching people. So that's a very solemn and sobering note on which to end this discussion. And we covered such a vast distance in getting here. But I hope you've had a good time with hearing Professor Islam. And I hope you can look forward to finding this book and purchasing it if possible to our audience in future. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.